That way, for people who weren't able to join us live, they'll be able to go back and listen to some of the information that was presented on their own time, or for any of you, if you would like to go back and listen to it later, that would be great. So if we go to the next slide. My name is Carol Lippert, and I'm the Executive Director for K-12 Outreach and Support with Grand Canyon University. And this fabulous picture that you see are two of my team members. We actually have 3 team members now. I'm so excited. But due to COVID-19, we haven't gotten a new picture yet. So hopefully one day we'll get a new picture that will also include Carolyn. We do encourage you to follow us on Twitter. So our Twitter handle is at GCUK12ED, or you can follow me personally at Carol Lippert1. Just keep up with what we're doing, and I love to hear about everything that you are doing as well. You can switch to the next slide. So we did want to share with you, Canyon Professional Development has a why. The why for why we do the work that we do and why we feel it's important. And I think it's particularly poignant to talk about it right now as we're doing this with you, the principals who are on the front lines and are trying to figure this out day after day. But our why is to empower, educate, and inspire our community so that they can take action, they meaning you, to fulfill your purpose and serve others. So what we'd like to offer to you is, please, at any time in this webinar, if there are things that you need, feel free to pop them into the chat, or later when you take the survey, there's an opportunity in the survey for you to tell us what other topics might be helpful for you as administrators on local schools. So feel free always to let us know what you feel that you need so that we can do our best job for you. That's our why. Go ahead, Jean. So what I want to do right now, without a whole lot of further ado, is I want to introduce to you Dr. Jean Mandernach. And Jean, yeah, she's up there in the top corner. Jean has been doing this PD online and teaching online for a really long time. And recently she was interviewed by a publication that we have at GCU called GCU Today. And man, I was reading her article, and my colleague Lee Critchley was reading the article, and we're thinking, we think she has a lot of really good information that you all as principals on campuses could benefit from. And so we reached out to Jean and said, hey, would you be willing to do this? And she said, sure. And we said, well, how about next week? And she said, sure. So here we are, and here's where we came from. So anyway, Jean is the Executive Director for CIRT, which is our the group that works with our faculty in terms of helping them to be the best teachers and instructors that they can be. So Jean, without further ado, I'm going to send it over to you and mute myself. But again, please pop everything into the chat if you need anything, and we'll be following the chat as it goes along. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Carol. As Carol said, this all kind of stemmed from an article that was published last week, I think it just was. And when they first called me, they said, oh my gosh, Jean, we have all these people going to online learning and teaching. You've been researching this for 20+ years. Tell us what we need to know to tell them so they can do it really, really well. And I paused and I said, well, the problem is you asked the wrong question, because we shouldn't be expecting them to do this really, really well. And the guy kind of paused, and we took a break, and he said, well, what's the right question? And that's when things got interesting. And that's really what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my video just to save bandwidth. Like almost everybody else, I'm now sharing internet with my family, and I've got 4 children and a husband who are all trying to do their work as well. So I'm just going to turn off my video to make this a little bit smoother for us. So when they called and said, you know, hey, can you help us out here? The first thing I said is, let's not call this online learning, because it's not. It's actually remote teaching and learning. And even then, it's not just remote teaching and learning, it's emergency remote teaching and learning. And so as you think about the last couple weeks, maybe even up to a month, what have been some of your greatest challenges? Could you go ahead and share those in the chat? What have been your greatest challenges as you've led your schools in this transition to emergency remote teaching and learning? If your chat didn't automatically appear, if you hover over the bottom, it should give you an option to click on chat and bring that up. So it's starting to come in here. Some of it's just with the management of the classroom itself. How do we deal with that? Some is, you know, getting students to use it, getting access to people, changing the culture a little bit, helping families understand. And on a really basic level, several, you know, do students even have internet? Do they even have computers to get us there? How do we engage them? How do we keep going? How do we keep adjusting when everything's changing? I like here Mark put, you know, the varying expectations of parents. And it's just not parents, it's the varying expectations of teachers, of parents, of students, of each other, of ourselves. The reality is, when we start talking about emergency remote teaching, it's really, really overwhelming because it's not an issue. Like I mentioned, when they called me to do the interview, their first question was, you know, tell us about the best practices that everybody needs to do this successfully. And I'm like, best practices? We're not at best practices. We're at survival mode here with everyone trying to figure out what this means and trying to figure out what this means while balancing their own socio-emotional health, their family, shifts in financial status and stability in their workload of trying to make it all happen. It's not just students that are struggling with internet access and computers and all the technology. It's teachers that are struggling. And even if they do have internet access at home and they have computers at home, do they have enough? Do they have enough to share it with everyone in their home that needs to be able to use it? There are so many questions that, frankly, it's overwhelming. And so when people start talking about this as online learning, the first thing that we have to do is remember it's not. This is emergency remote teaching. And when we start talking about that, it is survival mode. What are the minimum things that we need to do to effectively support our students and effectively support our teachers? When we say online learning, there are decades of research on best practices in online learning. And one of the things that we know quite consistently is that to develop an online class requires approximately 110 hours per class to create a good, high quality online classroom. That's just the curriculum, that's just the content, about 110 hours. Now, for most teachers, you don't have a class, you have multiple classes. So where are we going to get this? That means that's almost a month of full-time work to develop one class. We don't have that long. As Carol just said, 110, we don't have that long. Most instructors have only had a couple, let alone 110. So when people ask about best practices in online learning, it's the wrong question. So then what started to happen as people started to internalize and realize, like, wow, you know, if I try to actually get into the best practices in online learning, it's impossible. So then they went to homeschooling. This is like homeschooling with a computer. But what we forget is homeschooling is also a very different situation. In homeschooling, we have a curriculum already in place. Homeschooling often has a lot of guidance, it has a lot of planning, it has a lot of forethought. Parents that have decided to homeschool typically have a structure in place to make that happen, to manage their life. They generally are not trying to work a full-time job and doing homeschooling. And so when people started saying, homeschooling, and all these parents are homeschool teachers, it misses the mark again, and frankly, causes more problems than good. So let's really get into it then. What does the research tell us about emergency remote teaching? Nothing. Like literally nothing. Emergency remote teaching has only been studied to the extent that we can tell you about long-term student outcomes when their regular schooling was disrupted. So there is data telling us what happened to the kids that lived in New Orleans when Katrina hit and all their schools were destroyed and everything was, you know, thrown over. We have some of that data. Now, what we don't have is what were the best practices of those teachers? It doesn't exist. Now, the good news is when we ask questions like, what was the long-term outcomes? They were fine. The good news is the kids that were in school, elementary, high school, when Katrina hit, they went on to be super successful. They went on to get college degrees and get jobs, and their doctors and their lawyers and their tradesmen and their parents, and they adjusted just fine. But the challenge is, we as teachers, we as administrators, heck, even us as parents right now, we're all trying to figure out, what does this mean when it impacts everyone? And so when we start looking at the research that can possibly inform this, there is a body of research on online learning that might provide some useful snippets. There is a body of research on homeschooling that also provides some useful snippets. There's some good research on independent study. There's great research on telecommuting. There's a whole body of research on work-life balance. But what we can't do is pretend that suddenly we are all supposed to have mastered all of this research and figure out that sweet spot in the middle where all of it converges to create a dynamic, effective, engaging, smooth, emergency remote schooling experience. And if we buy into the idea that we're suddenly searching for best practices, we're going to leave everyone, ourselves, our teachers, our parents, frustrated. And the more frustrated they get, the more angry they get. If you haven't seen them yet, there's a couple interesting websites, or not websites, social media groups that have popped up on Facebook over the last 2 weeks. And one of them that I found particularly fascinating is one called Pandemic Pedagogy. And I find it fascinating not because it's so good or because it's so valuable, but because there's been an evolution in conversations. What started with, oh my gosh, what do we do? How do we approach this? What does it mean to try to find some pedagogy in the middle of this crisis? And that's where it started. You know, like 2 or 3 weeks ago, this group popped up. And in 2 or 3 weeks, it now has thousands of members. And the conversations have evolved to this like angry mob mentality where teachers can rarely do something right without everybody attacking them and telling them all the wrong things about the approach they just tried. And parents can no longer post their frustrations without having somebody else attack them on not understanding the perspective. And when an administrator, you know, posts something as simple as, you know, I'm struggling with what I'm going to do about evaluations this term, everyone jumps all over them. Now, we could just take it and say, that's the nature of social media. But the reality is it's telling us something about how we're all responding. When this first started, it seemed like it was going to be temporary. It was going to be quick. All we have to do is quickly hop online, give them a couple assignments, make a connection point, and then when we're back to school, we'll make up lost ground. We'll fix everything. All of us felt really comfortable with the idea we might lose a week or 2 of time together and then we were going to catch up. And then as it started to become apparent that this wasn't a week or 2 and that we weren't really going to come back, and that for the first time in all of our professional careers, we had to suddenly learn an entirely new way of teaching and learning, that's when frustration set in. And because there was no answers for this frustration, it shifted to anger. People are angry because they care and because they want to do what's right, and they simply don't know what's right. And so if we can at least embrace that, we can start to put up some shields, because especially you as administrators, you're taking the brunt of it. Every decision you make, somebody is questioning. Every decision, every attempt, there's going to be criticism. But what you need to keep reminding yourself is emergency remote teaching is a science with no evidence, with no best practices. Because by definition, It's temporary, and we're in crisis. And when we're in crisis, other things start to matter. And we have to balance how we try to keep doing what we were doing, recognizing it's not world as normal. Remember, 110 hours to create a good online course, and that's for people not in crisis. That's for people that want to teach online, for people that have the technology skill set to teach online. It is completely unrealistic to believe that when we shift to emergency remote teaching, we suddenly are going to be able to master these big picture things because we're in crisis. I saw a little meme that came up on social media. And when I first glanced at it, I was like, oh, this is such a good perspective. People have to remember school is not the most important thing that's happening right now. Yes, it's in the pyramid. Yes, it matters. But students are worried about other stuff. But then the more I thought about this, and the more I looked at this, the more I realized this isn't quite the situation that we're in. Because what people have noticed, probably far more than they've worried about the cognitive impact of students not being in school, are all the other impacts. Let's face it, school for many kids is how they meet their basic needs. It's not that school is in the pyramid, school influences the pyramid. And as principals and administrators, your job is not just in this situation to think about, holy moly, how do I get my teachers prepped and how do I throw this online? But you're also contemplating, how do I make sure I'm still getting lunches to the kids that need lunches? How do I make sure for the kids that school was their safe place, that they still have a safe place? It's not that school comes higher on this pyramid, it's that school is the pyramid. It's the how. If I was fancy enough to draw 3D graphics, which clearly I'm not, we would actually bring this out because school intersects across every level of their basic needs. And so it's not a matter of saying, how do we, throw school at the top and worry about the other things first? It's how do we take it all into consideration at the same time? And then there's the people that said, yeah, well, school should be focusing on their cognitive. It should be focusing on what they learn, their learning outcomes. Are we going to have them prepared for next year, prepared for the standardized test, prepared? We need to give them content. But if there is one piece of evidence that we could take from the online learning literature, a very large and robust set of literature, it's that the content is irrelevant if there's no connection. Students need to feel valued. Teachers need to feel valued. They need to feel like they can relate to others. The literature gives us 3 primary domains of interaction. And this is very, very consistent across 20 years of online learning literature. They said we look at how students interact with other students, so the student-to-student connection. We look at how students interact with content. We look at how students interact with the instructor. And when we can foster those connections, then we can get students to learn. I mean, we've all heard the quote, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And this might be even more true when we start thinking about crisis, emergency remote teaching. These students are unsure. They're catching snippets of the news. The older they are, the more they might be grasping it, but even then, not necessarily. They're also in crisis, and their families are all kinds of turned around right now. And so they're looking to school more than ever as stability. So it's not just the learning objectives. It's how does school help them meet all of those needs while still trying to focus on making sure they are getting access to that basic content and that we are able to encourage and interact and teach and give them feedback in a way that's meaningful. Now, I've spent far more time on social media in the last couple weeks than I probably should have, but there was another little meme that popped up. And, when I first glanced at it, and I just laughed, it threw Wi-Fi at the bottom. I have 4 children myself, ranging in age from 12 to 17. And I just laughed because Wi-Fi has become, the prime commodity at our house. If they don't do what I ask, pull the cord on the router. Wi-Fi. And so I saw this little meme and I just giggled. But again, as you start to think more deeply about it, it's kind of true, especially when we think about the relationship between school and how it helps students meet all of their basic needs. Because we know that school influences all levels. And it's not just what they do in school, it's what they're missing out of school. It's their clubs, it's their friends, it's their connections, it's their sports, their activities across the range. School is the how that many students are getting those basic needs met. And yet, we can't connect with them. And it's really hard to find student-to-student connection and student-to-teacher connection and student-to-content connection if they don't have Wi-Fi at home, if they don't have access to a computer, if your school district doesn't have some organized learning management system or structure or use of Google Classroom or something to provide structure to that communication. The challenges are on so many levels that it again becomes really overwhelming. And we can't expect teachers to be all things to the students. We can't expect them to be worrying about all of it. And as administrators, you can't solve it all. But what we can do is do the best we can. And that's it. We can't ask anybody to do more than their best. So when you start thinking about what does this mean, I think that we have to really think of some of the driving principles that are going to save any of us in a crisis situation. One, everyone, you, your teachers, your students, you're not all just working from home. You're at home in a crisis trying to work. And so it's important to keep remembering that. I work from home full-time. I've been a full-time telecommuter for over, let's see exactly, 19 years now. I've been a full-time telecommuter working from home. And when this whole thing hit, lots of people immediately said, well, gosh, your world doesn't even change. And I'm like, yeah, you're right, it really doesn't. Until we were about 3 or 4 days into this. And then suddenly I realized, yeah, my world does change. Because now I am sharing the Wi-Fi and I am sharing the computers and I am trying to help my kids do their work while I'm doing my work. And I am trying to fix meals and I am trying to juggle an entire full household. I haven't had to do that before. So even though I have always worked from home, I'm still at home during a crisis trying to work, as is everyone. And so I think that's the first thing, is to keep reminding yourself and your teachers and your students, it's okay to have a little perspective. We're not expecting them to produce the same level of learning outcomes that they would in normal times. We're doing the best we can. And I love the side conversation that's going on here, and I would encourage everybody to jump in, because on a very basic level, a lot of us right now are trying to solve the practical kind of bridges. And one of those practical bridges is absolutely like, what are you using for the structure? For those that don't have an LMS, what are you using? And so please go ahead and jump in and share what people are using. While you're doing that, I'll give you a side note. We've all heard them talking about, flattening the curve, flattening the curve. We're going to social distance to flatten the curve. Well, it makes me laugh because as we've social distanced to flatten the, epidemic curve, what we're doing is creating the curve for technology. And so places that didn't use Zoom before are now suddenly using Zoom. So much so that Zoom is discovering they're struggling to have the bandwidth to manage them all, to prevent the hackers, to have the security they need, when Zoom is suddenly being used on a scale that it was never designed to be used on. Same with Schoology. I've seen so many parents hopping on, social media to complain about it. But what we're forgetting is it was a solution never designed to be used with everybody online at the same time. It was a supplement. So we've actually created curves with technology that are exposing the fact that a lot of things aren't scalable. It wasn't just our, health systems and our hospitals that couldn't handle an all at once, hit, our technology can't either. And so I do think it's good to share, because 2 weeks ago, hardly anybody had used Zoom. Everybody started hopping on and using Zoom. Well, in the last 2 days, they're really discovering Zoom has struggled to handle that in terms of security. Hackers have figured out how to Zoom bomb. I mean, I don't even know that there was the term Zoom bomb more than a week ago. And it changed. And now suddenly schools and districts are going, oh my gosh, I just spent time training our teachers how to use Zoom, and now we need to go to something else. The reality is a lot of our practical bridges that we're putting in place are probably going to keep flexing and shifting, just like our understanding of the COVID-19 virus itself. The more we know about emergency remote teaching and the more we do, the more we're going to adjust, the more we're going to change. And that change is probably going to cause more frustration, which is why we have to go back and remind ourselves, keep perspective. This is emergency remote teaching. And because of that, also give ourselves a little break, take care of yourself, take care of your family, find a little balance. It is okay for us to accept that we're probably going to have a drop off in productivity. We're probably going to see a little decline on those standardized tests. And remember, it's okay. We're in an emergency. Be compassionate. What's happening right now is not normal. So we cannot pretend that we're going to suddenly shift and put it online and we're going to go back to normal. It's not. So do the best you can do. When we are all overwhelmed, it becomes our natural tendency to want to just grab on, create routine, and hold tight. And unfortunately, right now, we don't have a lot of routine. And as we're learning about remote emergency teaching, we're shifting. And that shift really is a good thing. But we have to keep reminding ourselves, and often even reminding the teachers that you're working with. I'm sorry that this was the rule last week, but here's what we learned about that rule, and here's why we're going to try to shift. And if you're able to shift, do it. And if you're not, that's okay too, because we're all trying to survive. And that's going to mean different things for different people. If I could give any teacher, anybody trying to still function during this process, one piece of advice, it's really boil it down and ask yourself at a bare bones level, what is it we need to do? What content do our students need to be successful? What kind of guidance can I give them? If you have an LMS or you're using Schoology or you're using Google Classrooms and it's working for you, stick with it. But if not, feel free to look around and see if there's something else. The reality is the technology is not what matters here. It's being able to boil it down, get rid of the fluff, and ask, what do they really need? One of the things that people immediately went to, and I think this is an appropriate crisis response, but the minute they found out they were going remote, they started scheduling synchronous sessions so teachers could do with their students live right at the computer what they would have been doing in class. And if that's what you need to do to survive, by all means continue doing it. But what we've learned over the last couple weeks is that many families don't have enough equipment for multiple children and parents to all be online at the same time and take advantage of those synchronous sessions. There may be different socioeconomic barriers that prevent equal use of those synchronous kind of opportunities. And so rather than thinking about how do I mimic what I would have done, go back to our rule, boil it down, what do they need? And then start looking, what are the different sources they could get that information? If those sources already exist, use what already exists. The internet is full of information. It's full of stuff. Start there. And then think more about how am I creating a learning activity that motivates students to use it when they can, that taps into what do they need to know, how do I get them to use this, and then how do I monitor to make sure they are. Victor asked a great question here, what are final grades going to look like? How are they going to even have finals? What does this mean? And unfortunately, there are absolutely no guidelines to answer that, but you can start to ask, well, have I boiled down to what I would really care about? And can I figure out how I would assess that? Is it still a traditional final exam? Or do we need to adjust and have it be something else, a final project, a final conversation, different alternatives? But sometimes it's a matter of us really being able to boil it down and say what matters? And is that mission critical, or is there another way? If you can't find what you mean, by all means, continue doing the video conferencing and the video lecture if that's what it is that you need to be able to connect them to the content. But I think we are discovering that it's not that they need their instructor so much to be the one that teaches them. They need their instructor to be the one that guides them. So it might be that you're creating a quick little video or having a quick synchronous session to kick them off and to help coordinate, to organize their thoughts, but perhaps it's not required mandatory kinds of synchronous sessions. And for those that really do need to stick with, I'm just going to turn on my video recorder and talk. Let's give ourselves a little bit of a break here. The goal here is not production quality videos. It's you. When you're in class with these students, they see your personality. They hear you make mistakes. They hear you correct yourself. And that's fine. Go ahead and do it here. We don't have to start thinking about how do I create the kinds of videos I see on the internet. If the video exists on the internet, use it. And if it doesn't, then you can hop in and start to guide them through and create those experiences. But unlike classrooms where students are really kind of a captive audience, they're now learning in a click and go environment where if they're not interested or engaged in some meaningful way, they're not going to watch it and they're going to leave. So really keep it short. Don't waste your time or your teachers creating 30-minute, 45-minute videos. The research tells us fairly clearly students aren't going to watch them. But they might watch 3 or 4 7 or 10-minute videos because the way you learn online is in much smaller chunks. So give yourself a break. Relax a little. If you want to use online content, there are so many good, easy, free, cheap ways to be able to customize existing online content. So perhaps helping your teachers by saying, relax, use what's available to you. Once you've boiled it down to the bare bones, can you find that content online? And then how would you want to teach it? One of the things that has happened, or I should say was happening a couple weeks ago when everybody was transitioning, was suddenly we were throwing all this tech training at them. And teachers were being asked to learn about Zoom and learn about Schoology and learn about Google Hangouts and learn about Google Classroom and learn about this technology and that technology and that technology. But really, you want to kind of slow it down and tell your teachers, don't worry about the technology. Worry about what you want to accomplish. Because if they can come and tell you or your technology coordinator or your support person what they hope to accomplish, then you can give them the 1 or 2 pieces of technology they might need to learn to make that happen. So for example, if your instructors or teachers say to you, there's great videos on the internet, but I need to be able to tell the student what to pay attention to. Well, now you can come to them and say, well, you know what? There's a technology called Edpuzzle that's free, that you can take a video and pause it, stop it, add your own questions, add your own comments, make students answer, add your own narrative to it to where you get to customize the video without having to recreate it. Now you give them the piece of technology. So it's not about training them on a bunch of technologies. It's about helping them to see how to find the technology to meet their pedagogical need. Yes, several people are asking if you're going to get the slides. Absolutely. Everybody can have a copy of these slides. And if you have additional questions about the technologies, I would be happy to follow up with those later. I'm actually not going to go into the details about the technology because I firmly believe the technology should be a tool. So we don't want to focus on the technology unless we have a pedagogical need that requires us to use that tool. What you really want to impress upon your teachers is that now that you've switched to remote, their job is slightly different. Rather than giving content or to that captive live audience, their job is really to create a learning experience. And when you start to shift your mentality to creating a learning experience, it opens up lots of opportunities, because now it's a matter of, how do I find what I need to get students to engage? How do I monitor their engagement? So you can start to rethink and say, well, if I was in the face-to-face classroom, I probably would have had a discussion with my students. Well, what does that look like online? Would it work to have an asynchronous discussion? Do we need to send an email? Maybe I could just have them journal about it. But you can start to go through what they would have done in class and start to look, are there alternatives that meet that same need? Once we've boiled it down and gotten rid of all the fluff, what else is there? And the good news is there are so many possibilities of ways to get them to engage. And when you go back to the idea that your job is to create a learning environment that motivates that they want to get in there and see it, and then monitors it, that there's some sort of a way that you can know that they got in there. Oftentimes our job as a teacher is giving them information simply because we know they won't utilize it otherwise. That we can give them assignments, but they're not going to use them outside of class. Well, now we have to think, how do I design a learning experience that just really makes them utilize those things that already exist? Because lots of them exist. So now we can start going in and saying, well, you know, I'm going to have a video, and at the end of the video, I'm going to simply say, I'd like you to send me an email that gives me your thoughts and opinions on this. I love using classroom assessment techniques because they're short. The goal here is not to overwhelm students with tons of work and to overwhelm teachers with tons of grading. Sometimes it's a matter of utilizing some of those automated quizzing features. Kami now lets them type their answers into existing worksheets. So if they don't even have time to digitize those worksheets, they can use Kami and have students submitting that way. Google Classrooms has all kinds of built-in quizzing options. Sometimes it's a matter of just having them reflect, respond, give some sort of an indication. As an example, my son, my very sweet but characteristically lazy 15-year-old son, came upstairs the other day completely frustrated, and he's like, oh my gosh, my science teacher just made us watch this video, and then at the end of it, it was just 2 really easy questions asking our opinion about something. And I said, and he goes, well, I could have given my opinion without watching the video. And I said, but don't you think the point of it was to make you watch the video? Would you have watched the video if you didn't have to give your opinion about it? And he was like, well, no. I'm like, that's the point. She's designing a learning experience that then can motivate and monitor your use, because you're going to learn if you watch the video. She just had to make sure she could get you to watch it. So there's lots of technologies that we can then do depending on what we want students to do. Maybe we want them to just go to a website and we want them to read through it. That you can actually make an assignment that simply says, I want you to highlight the thing you found most interesting and summarize it in 1 sentence. Go into the website itself, use hypothesis, do it right there. Doesn't have to be a lot of work. We just have to motivate their engagement with the material. One of the biggest debates over the last couple weeks has been synchronous or asynchronous. And there's absolutely no answer to that question because it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. We know that there are many, many, many practical barriers to mandatory synchronous interaction. Not that it's not a good way to relate or that it's even an effective way for teachers, but we just know there's a lot of practical barriers. So as a general rule of thumb, I think I would encourage your teachers to use asynchronous when possible, because it helps students who are sharing Wi-Fi, sharing devices, or that don't have really consistent access or consistent support at home to do that. The other question has been, do we need an LMS? No, but if you have one, use it. Use what's available to you. And so if your school is a Google school, use the Google Classroom. It's very effective. If you're a Schoology, stick with it. If you guys are nothing and you're needing to piece it together, know that you can make this happen with email if you had to. The goal here is not about the technology. So often we jump to the technology because technologies can do things, but technology needs to be there only when it meets our needs. We can't use technology for the sake of technology, particularly when people are in crisis, they're overwhelmed, they're already tapped out. You want to use as little as you have to use to do something. So what do we want students to do? We want them to think, we want them to explore, we want them to reflect, to interact. Most of these things can be done with very, very little technology. They can do it with email. Heck, if you have to, they can still put it in the US mail. They can snap pictures and they can text it to you. One of the things I found most frustrating as I followed kind of the social media buzz is I'll hear teachers or administrators say, well, not every student in my district has access to a computer and Wi-Fi, so we can't do that. Well, the reality is you can do that for most, but because we're in emergency remote teaching, we might have to take special steps and help those who can't. So if only 80% of your students have Wi-Fi access or 50% have Wi-Fi access, if that's the easiest way, using an LMS, using websites, using email, and doing what you're doing, by all means, just do what you can the easiest way possible for the students that can access it that way, but then be prepared to be flexible and adjusting for those that can't. If you have students that do not have a computer, they do not have Wi-Fi, you can't necessarily control that, but you can start getting creative and saying, okay, well, that student probably isn't going to finish by the end of this semester, but here's what we can do to mail them a textbook, what we can do to scan, print out pages and have them dropped securely at their house. Because if it's not everyone, we can start adapting and being flexible for those who can't meet the baseline. The rule here is not what is the lowest common denominator. It's what's a temporary, easy, emergency way to hit most, and then how can we be flexible and accommodating to adapt and try to ensure success for the others that need it. In general, what are we looking at right now for our students? When possible, asynchronous, frequent contact, opportunities for interaction, kind of some low stakes feedback kind of things. We don't want to pile on a lot of work simply because we can. Students are in crisis, families are in crisis, lots and lots of flexibility, and lots of connection. Students, particularly the younger students, are craving seeing their teachers, craving seeing their classmates. So it's totally fine to utilize synchronous opportunities, but perhaps have some of that not linked to the teaching itself so that we aren't discriminating against the students who can't take advantage of that. But it's completely fine to say, you know what, your teacher is going to be online and here's what they can do. But also remember, it's completely fine if your teachers don't feel equipped to do that as well. Our teachers are also in crisis. Our teachers are also juggling, and one size doesn't fit all. So as administrators, I know that the easier, more manageable solution is to have policies, to make everyone do office hours, to make everyone have synchronous sessions, to make everyone use a particular LMS. But the challenge is, the more we try to make everyone the same, the less we're going to be able to be flexible to adapt to the crisis needs of everyone. We need to have some faith, and we need to have some trust and belief that everyone is doing the best they can possibly do. Will there be people that let us down? Absolutely, without a doubt. But most won't, and most will be as accommodating and flexible and dedicated as they can be. And then if they're adjusting and reflecting and trying harder when they figure out that what they did before didn't quite work, that's about the most we can ask for. Because right now, you want to boil it down. Do they have access to some content? And do we have some opportunities for them to get some guidance, some practice, some reflection, and some feedback? Within the school context, there are really 3 keys for success. Do we still have some connection? Whether that be your learning management system, a video conference, an email, a telephone call. My children actually even received from one of their teachers a postcard in the mail Something that says, hey, I'm still here, we're still working together, we're gonna figure this out together, even if we're adapting. Can we figure out how to get them access to their content? Many students went home for spring break without books, and they don't have them, and they might not have any access to get them. We might have to be flexible for those students. That doesn't mean we can't go ahead and start building things for the others. And can we get them feedback, interaction with that teacher to let them know, you're gonna be okay, and we are going to learn. So as administrators, you know, we just wanna make sure we're giving balanced communication. I say balance here. Several of the articles that I've read lately have said one of the biggest challenges that has arose out of this is in an attempt to be supportive, people have become overwhelmed with emails and communication, so much so they're shutting down and not using them. So we want to have it somewhat balanced. How do we support them? Asking, what can I do to help you? Without our attempts at help creating more problems for them. Offer opportunities for connection with your teacher. And that's not the same as saying we're having mandatory faculty meetings, but it might be, hey guys, I'm going to be online over my lunch hour. If anybody wants to pop in, we can have coffee together. We can chit chat while we're having lunch, maybe, you know, share war stories. But really letting them know that you're there for them, to encourage them to take care of themselves, that you recognize they are at home trying to work during a crisis, and that we're all going to be flexible and there's not one size that fits all. So we're going to have to be accommodating and be trusting and give them some guidance and ask, you know, what are you struggling with? Do you need help with your time management, attention management, even being able to focus? Let me know so that we can be responsive to those particular needs. I think for me, the one kind of analogy that I keep going back to, or metaphor, frankly, I can never remember the difference between an analogy or a metaphor, but it's the idea of drowning. Right now, administrators, teachers, students, parents, we're in crisis. People are drowning, trying to adapt, to figure this all out, to figure out what this means, and nobody's quite sure when it's going to end. Everyone is drowning. And when we're drowning, the last thing we need is someone trying to give us swimming lessons or trying to critique our stroke. When we're drowning, we need help. We just need somebody to save us. And one person might be able to save us by throwing us a life preserver. Another person might be able to save us by role modeling a better way to float. Another person might shove out an oar. In the end, I don't really care how I'm saved, as long as someone saves me. So if we can step back and remember, everyone is in crisis. Now is not the time to be frantically doing professional development, but it is the time to say, I know you're doing the best you can. Is there anything I can do to help? Let me know what you need from me so that I can help you. Everyone's in a different place. Some people are in districts and schools where everyone has a computer, everyone has Wi-Fi, good to go. Other people are not. So wherever you are at, do the best you can. Don't compare yourself to others and what other districts are doing. Don't even pretend to hop into best practices. Do the best you can with where you're at. And with that said, let's open it up for more questions, comment, discussion. It seems like a lot of the questions were really about some of the practical things. So if you'd like to bring those up now, I encourage you to do so. The other thing I will do is I'm going to throw up here a link for feedback. So while we're discussing, if you want to click on that link and go ahead and give some feedback to Carol and crew, that would be super helpful. So yeah, let's just open it up. Questions, comments, thoughts.
Yeah, feel free to unmute or start your video if you'd like. Hi, Josh.
Hi, first of all, thank you guys so much. This has been super informative and helpful. I'd like just some thought on the idea of grading, and that after kind of creating a culture more of where we're doing the best we can and it's okay, where do you guys feel like that falls in regards to still providing data of progress for our students and families?
Well, I'll start by giving you a little bit of what the literature has started to dabble at. And then I would really love if you guys would hop in and share with each other, because you are definitely more in the trenches with this than I am. The data has started to hint at there are going to be differences based on the needs of any individual school. So schools that tend to have more of a college prep audience is likely going to need to provide more of a traditional grade, simply because the colleges are not sure how they're going to deal with that, particularly for seniors coming out. The colleges right now are having these exact same conversations. So they're also saying things like, what do we do about admissions? What do we do about students that, do we just not pay attention to that last GPA? Do we take the cumulative GPA? What do we do for, you know, class rank and things? At the college level, what they've started to do, and I do not know the extent that this will help you, but I'll just tell you what they've started to do, is providing student by student opportunities. Some students absolutely said, I just wanted to go to pass fail and not have this impact my GPA. Other students have said, I was counting on this GPA. I needed those points for XXX, or I needed this class with this grade for, you know, whatever prerequisite for this. So at least at the college level, they've started to reach out and give opportunities, not for a completely customizable a la carte menu, but for, here are 2 or 3 options our school can accommodate. Let us know which option you as an individual would like for your student. And so then there's some of them that are doing grades, some that are, in one class, you'll have some students that are doing grades, some students that are doing pass fail. And I can even tell you, my husband, he's again a high school teacher, and he teaches a senior level physics class. And they actually gave his students the opportunity, if they had enough credits and didn't need that class to graduate, they could just go ahead and drop the class, even though they were past that drop date. Because many of those students said, well, at this point now I'm risking it. And if I was just going pass fail anyway, I'm really not going to put that much into it. So this became a pointless class. And so they did give that opportunity at this point to decide that that wasn't going to happen. So I think there's not a one size fit all, but I have seen some variations. What other variations have schools seen or offered or started talking about?
Hi, Jill.
Hi. So we have done a variation where we're doing grades for our core classes, and then allowing the elective courses to be up to the individual, whether it's pass fail or pass no credit. So if it's too much for them to take on, they can drop it for no credit. It seems to have lightened their load a bit, but a lot of them need the grades for scholarships and things like that. So this is a good blend of both.
Great suggestion. Thanks, Jill. Anybody else have other suggestions, things they're doing for grading? I liked, somebody shared earlier about doing the projects and sort of switching to a more project-based learning kind of structure, which is, I think, interesting. Mark, you have something to share?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm waiting. That's a real firm answer. I'm kind of waiting, but because if we just say, hey, we're not taking any grade, obviously we know what that results, and even parents want us to provide accountability. But what I'm thinking of is, based on the different class, I talk with the teacher and say, okay, your average normally in this class is an 88. It seemed like the assessments is a 78, so we just kind of automatically add so many points per class and do the best we can. It sure isn't perfect, but you need accountability, but you're also realizing they're not in an ideal learning environment, so can we require the same, the same out of them? So that's why I'm probably going to sit down with each of my secondary teachers and say, okay, what do you think is fair? And obviously we don't advertise this to the kids, or they share with each other, hey, it doesn't matter, everybody's getting 15 points extra anyway. So that's what we are planning to do, is wait and see how this unfolds, and then talk to each individual teacher based on, you know, what they think, how many points the average kid suffered, I guess is a simpler way to put it.
Yeah, you know, Mark, I would jump in on that because I have some personal experience going on in my own house right now with my son who's in college, right? And they got the message from the college about a week ago that says we're switching everybody to pass fail. So guess what that meant to him? Was like, well, guess what? I'm just going to do enough to pass, you know? And of course, there's me in his ear nattering going, no, 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 that's not how it works in this house. But, you know, I mean, I do think it's really interesting to really think that through, like, you know, where's the balance in motivating and in that caring piece, right? So you have to figure out the ways to bring that all together, and it's a tough balance. But I like how you're just sort of saying, you know what, we're just gonna take it slow and easy and a day at a time, and we're gonna figure this out together. I love that you're involving your teachers in that decision too. So yeah, Stephen, I see you shared a district example. That's great. If anybody wants to grab that video and click it, that's very helpful. Anyone else have another question or comment? I know that there was some discussion in the chat on social emotional learning resources. We added some resources in there, and we have done recently a video on that. So hey, do you mind fast forwarding, Jean, the presentation a couple of slides?
Sure. Yep, or one more.
One more. So we've been doing, just so you're aware, in case you didn't already know, we've been doing weekly Wednesday webinars. They've been geared a lot towards teachers, but we have had a number of administrators join in on them as well. They are all archived on our YouTube channel. And I would encourage you, there was one webinar specifically to helping students through the sort of the anxiety and trauma that is being caused in some sense by this. So I would encourage you to look at that, as well as there were a couple of tips of the day on there that were also designated to just kind of extra social emotional supports for students. So definitely go on our YouTube channel and take a look at those resources that are there. And again, please feel free, reach out to us at any time and let us know what you need. If you haven't taken the survey, please do. It provides us great feedback and lets us know what other information you need. We're happy to stay on for another few minutes. It is 1 o'clock though, and I know that you are all very busy individuals. So if you have other questions that you'd like to share or talk about, I'm happy to stay on the line with you for a few more minutes. Otherwise, this will sort of close out our webinar. I thank you for joining us, and we will get another one planned for you very soon.
Thanks, everyone, and good luck.
Jean, you were amazing. Thank you for all of the expertise that you shared with us. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Looks like everybody's just logging off one at a time. I'm going to stop the recording.